Welcome to our first video in Unit 2, where we're going to start working on Project 2. So the objectives for today's video are to learn our course's definition of the word reading, to also begin to understand what the concept of multimodal means, and also to really kind of give you a compelling reason, why, before we figure out why we should do it, let's figure out how we do it. How do we read or interpret or analyze a multimodal text? And then I will give you a justification for why in the world we're spending so much time doing this. So, how do we define reading for this course? So a lot of people are like, reading is just decoding words on a page or like finding the main idea, but let's sharpen that definition. For the purposes of this course, what it means to read is to use all the clues available to you to interpret some text or some composition. So if a text is not just written words, a text can be a picture, a text can be many things. A text or a composition, we're going to kind of use that as the same word. And so when we read that, what we're actually doing is we're actively interpreting it, using all of the different things at our disposal to do so. So if we're reading books, the clues that we use to interpret are actually the words, the titles, sometimes even the punctuation, like if there are lots of ellipses, if there are all caps. Sometimes the formatting, we might actually look and see that that gives us some clues. There might be images within a book that we might read. What about photography? How do we read a photograph? If by read we mean interpret, well, we look for all kinds of things like what are the colors? What objects are there? How is it laid out in the visual space? Are there words there? Do we see characters like people? Do we see something that is recognizable to us? What about the way that the lighting works? Is it dark? Is there shadow? Is it bright? What about a film? How can we read a film as opposed to just watch a film? So when we're reading a film, we're paying attention, we're interpreting. We might also look at the colors and the objects, the layout, the words. These are all the same as a photography, characters, light and shadow, but we also have the angle that the camera takes. We also have the amount of time that the shot is allowed to stay in the frame. We also have sounds whenever we're talking about films that we don't have in photography or still images. We might have music, we might have talking dialogue, we might have noise, ambient noise that's either diegetic or non-diegetic. So this is one of those film words. Diegetic means in the world of the film. Can we hear it in the world of the film? So if they're playing a song, is it something that the characters can hear? Or is it non-diegetic, meaning it's outside of the world of the film and it's just for the film viewers? So there's lots of things to pay attention to. Also, we can look at the transitions as a clue for what's happening and how we can interpret it. And there are 1,000 more things, lots of different things, mise en scène and editing and all these kinds of things. So when we are reading something like a film or a piece of photography, we call this a multimodal text. And this is kind of just a stupid, fancy academic word for something that's pretty basic. So if a mode is a way of getting meaning across, so the written writing is a mode. Speaking is a kind of mode, so this oral, this hearing, auditory, visual is a mode, so what you can see. All of these things convey meaning, and as you saw, I have gestural as well. That's another mode of making meaning. And if a text is anything that someone actually just composes and creates, then multimodality is a text or composition that deals with more than one mode of meaning. So it's not just the written word. It might be the written word along with images, or images along with sound. Basically anything that we can imagine that is not just a static text. So are all texts multimodal? In a way, yes, because even if you have the written word, you still have a visual. You're actually looking at something. You have layout. You have all kinds of stuff. So yes, all things in essence are multimodal because there are lots of different ways we can get meaning out of them. But when we say multimodal, what we usually mean is something that's not just a written essay. And so what we're going to be focusing on in class for this unit is moving images with sound, so film and music videos specifically. When you read and analyze multimodal text, it's a lot more complicated than just reading and analyzing a written word because there's so much to pay attention to. So when we read a multimodal text, you actually have to pay a lot of attention. You have to notice things. You have to think about just a whole host of data as you're watching or reading or paying attention. So some things that you want to make sure you do is you're not just saying what happened. It's not just that the dog walked across the screen. What color was the dog? How was the dog lit? What was the shot composition of the dog? What sounds were happening when the dog walked across the screen? It's not just about what happened. It's about what is going on in the images and in the sounds. So some of the things you might ask yourself as you're actually reading multimodal text are there recurring visual motifs? Do I see the same kinds of objects or images or things a lot in this movie or in this moving image? What about, are there color schemes that are very important to this? And why did the author use these colors? What should these colors represent? What do they make us think and feel and believe? What about the camera? If we're looking at a film or if we're looking at a short video, how does the camera move? What point of view does it have? And why is that happening? Think about the sound. Is it eerie? Is it overwhelming? Is there really exuberant music? Is there kind of just a lot of weird crackling noises? Why are these sounds paired with these images and what might that mean? What about costuming and people and the things that they're wearing? What might that say about what's happening in the text? What about juxtaposition? So if we have one thing right now and then suddenly it switches to a different thing, what is that quick switch, or what is that putting them next to each other? What does that actually mean? How can we interpret that? What about references? Are there references? Do we see some example or some literal sample whenever it comes to music? We often hear a beat or a little part of another song in a new song kind of remixed. Is there some connection that creates, some meaning that creates that changes the way we think about the media? So you might be saying, okay, why are we worrying about this? Why are we actually doing this analysis? Is this really writing? Is this a writing class kind of thing? And I think it absolutely is. But a lot of people say, well, shouldn't movies and music just be fun? Shouldn't we just be able to look at these things and entertain ourselves and have a good time? Yes, I think we should. We often need to just watch movies and not read movies. We often need to just watch media and not read media. However, media is sending us messages all the time. And if you're paying attention to them, you might be able to pick up on what some of those things are. You might actually not endorse the message that it's sending. And it also just feels better to be aware of what kinds of messages are swirling around you. So we really should develop the critical thinking skills to be able to examine what we watch and to draw actually good conclusions about the ideas and messages that it can contain. So often this happens like a movie comes out and everybody's up in arms like, oh, this has this political message or this has this political message, and people kind of fight about it. Well, you should have a sharpened sense of being able to think for yourself, to realize what's actually going on. And while there's no one way to interpret a piece of media, what we're going to learn about with rhetorical analysis is that actually there are some ways to absolutely wrongly interpret media, and that we can figure out what those ways are. Part of it is by paying attention to the context around it. So that's one reason we're going to do this. And here's the thing, the author, the person who wrote the thing or the person who made the thing, does not have to intentionally make the message for it to be present. What we're looking at is, how do all these elements in the thing work together to form impressions or connotations in the viewer's mind? That is not to say that the intent of the author is completely irrelevant. It's very relevant. But imagine if you've ever said something to your friend and they are really mad at you and you said, what do you mean? And you've actually deeply offended them and you didn't even know it. But the thing is, what you said did have that meaning for that person. So maybe that means that sometimes the author absolutely knows what they're going for, and sometimes they don't exactly know, and there are other meanings that are associated with it. So I want to give you an example of what we can do with rhetorical analysis and how looking at and reading this media will give us a better sense of what's actually going on. So let's talk about Batman. Whenever we have Batman conversations now, we think very much about like this very dark stuff. But Batman was kind of a fun sort of comic book figure in the 60s and throughout the 20th century. This is the 60s Batman. It's just kind of capery. You see all the fun colors. And how could we read this? This doesn't look super serious. All the colors are very bright and vibrant and exciting. And the characters are silly. And if you've ever watched the 60s Batman, it's very funny and ridiculous. And then we get Tim Burton's Batmans in the late 80s and 90s. And this is a kind of fun and silly creative world. It's a little dark, but it actually is punctuated by just a lot of whimsy and total silliness. You have Danny DeVito as the Penguin. You have Catwoman, Michelle Pfeiffer. They are kind of like real campy characters. I don't know if anybody knows about the Joel Schumacher videos, the Joel Schumacher ones. Those were in the 90s, and they're also really, really bad. They're full of a lot of puns, but they're very bright and silly and fun. Okay, well then we get into the Christopher Nolan Batmans, and maybe you were mostly alive for this version of Batman, so maybe you've never known a Batman that was kind of silly and campy, but Christopher Nolan's Batman Begins comes out in 2005, and there's a big shift. You can even see from the images here. Like, even though we have darkness with this, it's ridiculous. It's Danny DeVito. He looks crazy, and he's a penguin person, and it's just ridiculous. And then we see the bright and colors, so the kind of clues that we're getting from the images and the soundtracks were kind of goofy as well. But then we move to this like really serious, dark stuff in 2005. And so you see, here's Christian Bale looking very serious. The visuals and the music got a lot darker, and the color palette is more brown, and everything is just very, very serious. You'll notice that it is post 9/11. So in September 11th of 2001, we had kind of this transformational experience where a lot of our media reflected that. And so there was some darkness brewing in our world, and then some very serious thinking about crime and terrorism. So let's think about what Batman is really all about all over its entire oeuvre. So no matter when you're talking about Batman, regardless of what kind of clues of visuals you get, you have vigilantism, right? So Batman is a single lone actor, and he kind of acts on his own, often violently, using his kind of like weaponry. And he doesn't ask for permission to do this. He takes matters into his own hands. So no matter which Batman we're talking about vigilantes. We also see that, it feels good when Batman serves justice to this kind of the lawless streets of Gotham. It also, however, amplifies this message that the way we do change and the way we get justice is not through community, and it's not through politics. In fact, they can create problems. So this is what the Batman kind of is sending these messages. And whenever we're looking at the campy kind of ones, it's just a silly, lighthearted one. And here we are, though. It gives us a sense that whenever we look at Batman, that change really comes through this individual one guy, especially, and not just individual one guy, rich individual one guy, heterosexual individual one guy who's just like really in charge. He knows what's good for the community, and that's that. So, oh yeah, we already got that. It only comes through individuals. And then also we have this idea of Bruce Wayne as kind of a loner. He's a little bit of a sad guy. He's just like by himself all the time. His best friend is his butler. It also sort of valorizes extreme isolation and taking matters into one's own hands. And the thing is, if you're presenting this with a lot of browns, dark stuff, incredibly serious faces, where we're taking it seriously and it's not just people having fun in a campy romp, it actually makes the viewer take these messages more seriously too. This is not me saying that you can't enjoy the Christopher Nolan Batmans. I loved them when they came out. I remember watching them in college with friends, and it was really fun. And you can absolutely love Batman. But I think what a rhetorical analysis and what reading a movie actually does for us is it shows us what are those messages that are subtly being sent. If we're asked to take Batman seriously, then we're also asked to take all of the things that Batman stands for seriously. And I wonder if we really actually stand by those. Some of them maybe we do, but some of them maybe we don't. So I want us to talk about the difference between what is an individual interpretation and what is a rhetorical analysis. Because here's the thing. On all the YouTube videos, a lot of people are like, oh, this is just my personal opinion. It's just my personal opinion. Yes, that's great. You can talk about your personal opinion. And when you see the color brown in the Batman movies, to you, maybe that means my grandma, because my grandma loved the color brown. We love that for you. That's completely great. We think it's great. However, if you're so for you, maybe Christopher Nolan's Batman means fun and personal empowerment. Love it. Have no problem. But when we're trying to do a rhetorical analysis, we're actually not trying to just do a personal interpretation. We're trying to link our personal interpretation up to the larger context so that we can make a comment about what it means to the broader society. You say, I see this color or this image, and I know that there is some shared cultural meaning to this color and image. And I can show you evidence that this is true. I can look at some analysis of color. I can look at some historical uses of that color and show you that. I can show evidence this is true. I can also talk about the context of when this was made. I can talk about who made it. I can talk about the history of it. I can talk about the circumstances around the creation. So, we can talk about 9/11 and how that created a kind of serious sort of backlash against another wave of real upset about crime and about this idea of others infiltrating and this need to kind of take over and really root out the bad is sort of the cultural conversation that was happening at this time. And so therefore I can reasonably say that one of the things this means, so one of the interpretations for a large group and not just for me is, and then you can kind of insert your own interpretation, which I said, in its serious and dark presentation, Nolan's Batman subtly advocates for loner male vigilantism in the face of social upheaval. Now, this was just a very surface reading. I haven't written this essay. I would have to do a lot of work to do so, and I would have to do a lot more research. But this gives you an example of what I mean by the difference between a personal reading and a rhetorical analysis, which is a reading that should be helpful for a larger group of people. So next up, I'm actually going to show you the method for how you do this analysis, and you're going to do it in real time. So you should lock in, pay attention, and get ready to write down some notes and get started with your project too.